The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hi, this is Father Nathan. Welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. This is the third in a trilogy around a person you could meet in my newest book, Afterlife Interrupted, Book 3, Please Let Me Explain. His name is Samuel. We're calling him Samuel the Clothier. That's what he did for his life's work. He worked in high-end menswear, and we met him in this process that we do for folk that show up and ask for some help in their afterlife movement. It's best if you can go to find that book. It's on Amazon. It'll soon be out as an audiobook. We've just finished doing the audiobook, but it takes a few weeks of production to get it all the way to being available for purchase. But in the previous two podcasts, I've told his story in brief. And then last time I did a thing we call compassionate response to how this story might have affected people who've heard it. And today we'll be doing what we call spiritual practice. If you recall, Samuel he died after retiring, so somewhat late in life. He explained to us when we were in dialogue with him that he said that he was a homosexual person in a time and place where, had that been known, it would have been thought awful. And so he didn't disclose that very often at all, but he said he was determined to have a happy life. And he said, for good or ill, the way that a man dressed and appeared caught his eye. He decided to turn that trait to the good and make it serve people. So he worked in fine men's clothing. He said his bread and butter were the stockbrokers and lawyers who could afford that kind of clothing and service. But he also enjoyed the occasions when someone who normally wouldn't shop at such a nice place, perhaps before their wedding or a job interview, would come in, and he would do a consult with them about their appearance. He explained that his method was to engage a person and ask them if they were willing to describe some physical characteristic that they had that they thought was a positive, something about their appearance that they liked. He said many people had never been asked that and found it hard to even answer the question, to talk about themselves, their appearance, in a positive way. But he said usually most people could do it. And then he followed that with, would you permit me to assess what I think are some characteristics of you that are positives that we could build upon? And he said clients usually said yes to that. So he might say, well, you have piercing green eyes. So any shades of green that we might have in your clothing will prompt better eye contact with you and better human interactions. He said he might say, you have an engaging smile. You look like a gentleman who has a smiling countenance. He said this part of your face suggests gentleness. So I wouldn't put anything scratchy like wool next to your face. I would go with cloth that has more of a sheen, or something that is just softer. So I thought that was really informative. I'd never given that much thought. Anyway, he described how he started by building on positives. And then he told us an extraordinary thing, that in his afterlife, the person who was his companion most of the time, who was actually his guardian angel, kind of in disguise, sort of. Maybe that's not the right word, but he said this person who accompanied me presented himself as though he were like one of my loyal long-term clients, somebody that I had a long history with, and with whom I got along well. He said that at one point his guardian said to him, "Would you allow me to show myself to you as I truly am? Would you allow me to show you to myself as I truly am?" Have you ever said that to anyone? I just thought it was a really disarming, lovely question. And he said, "Well, of course." And he said, "Well, then watch me closely." And his guardian said, "Watch me now while I turn." And he did a 360. He just turned and he went from being rather human looking in his form to nothing but blazing light. He did it slowly enough that uh, Samuel was able to take in the beauty of it. And then when he morphed back, converted back into the way that he appeared earlier in a more human form, he said, "Tell me what you just saw." And Samuel said, "I just saw beauty beyond anything that I've ever seen before." And he said, "Well, would you step this way?" And he brought Samuel in front of one of those series of mirrors where one of them is right in front of you and the other two are going off at a 45-degree angle. You've been in one of those in a clothing store, I'm sure, where it allows you not only to see a frontal view of the clothing you're considering buying, but a sort of a side peripheral view at the same time. He had that was a tool of the trade. Samuel would have done that, used those all the time. He was asked by his guardian to stand in a place like that. He said, "Now, would you turn and do as I just did, and then look at the mirror?" And Samuel did a turn, and it wasn't exactly the same because a human and an angel are not exactly the same. But he said it was very similar. He saw nothing but beauty, color, light, uh, and when he turned all the way around and came back to the form that he had been in previously, his guardian said, "Now, what did you see?" He said, "Well, I saw beauty, indescribable beauty." And he said, "Now, is it really true that you are that beautiful?" And he said, "I can't deny it. I just witnessed it." So that's the basic story that I'm working with. As a spiritual practice, I wonder, I'm going to use a word that is often used around churches. So if you're not a churchy person, don't let it distract you. It's a benign word. It just gets used at church a lot. It's called convert. In fact, when I do these, I'm doing this on Zoom. As soon as I end this program and I hit end meeting, a box pops up and the file converts. I don't understand what it's converting from and to, but it needs to do something to change the way it is before I can save it and then send it on to be edited. Convert just means co and con mean with, and vert means to turn or to turn around. So to convert means to turn around. The challenge for us, I think, is that sometimes when someone suggests that we need to convert or that it would be in our best interest to turn around, very often our egos immediately dig their heels in. What do you mean I need to convert? I'm perfect just the way I am, or I don't need your judgment or whatever. We can take umbrage at the very idea that there's anything in us that needs to change. Well, that's just your ego. Okay, once in a while somebody is just being rude, but most of us move through life maturing and growing into our higher self, whatever you want to call it, your best self, by changing. And uh, and it's good to change often. Uh, Onward and upward. Anyway, the idea behind this spiritual practice is if you wanted to convert from the version of yourself that you are currently to an even better version, how would you do that? Well, in particular for this little spiritual exercise, because Samuel was on the receiving end of other people's disdain because of his orientation. He said, he was used to being thought ill of. Um, but he didn't let that drag him down. It was just a fact that was sort of beyond his control. So, um, where I'm going with this is I want to ask you if you're interested. Do you think there's any one individual or kind of person that you look down on and don't feel like that's a problem? I, for example, grew up in Southeast Texas I was born in 1956, and in my early years, the Catholic churches that I belonged to were segregated. There were white Catholic churches and in a town with enough black Catholics, their own church because of segregation. The church at the time didn't stand up to that wrong. It accommodated it. Well, I lived through the period when we did convert. I I went to a Catholic high school that was the first in the county to uh, mix white and black students. I was there for those early years. And I watched that even embedded systems that had gone on for generations were capable of changing, and it was for the better that they did. But I did see that even an institution like my church that I trusted could kind of haplessly go along with something that really wasn't right and that put other people down, that put somebody down. If you know the Jesus stories in the Gospels, he's at odds with the organized religion of his day a great deal of the time. And a lot of that is because it had accommodated to um, allowing or even teaching that some people ought to be excluded. The Samaritans, for example, had been opponents in a civil war 500 years earlier, and there were still grudges about that. So the story of the Good Samaritan is so astounding because who would have thought there was a good one? We've only been taught that they are scum. Um, there would be, the woman caught in adultery, or people saying, "Don't you know what she does for a living?" or somebody outside the border of one thing or another, and uh, very often there were whole groups of people, lepers, for example, that you just weren't supposed to go near, and it was okay to uh, look askance at them. So I wonder if there's any group of people in your own life where you might have picked up some such training, and are you willing to look at that again? It doesn't have to be social economic groups or ethnic groups. It could be family loyalties. There might have been some rift in your family a generation or two ago, and we don't talk to that side of the family because of something. Uh, or even more painfully, there might be somebody in your past that did you something uh, wrong and painful and never apologized for it. And so when you think of them, you have uh, feel like you have a right to the grudge or the the ill will because they started the fight, something like that. You might not want to do this. You just might not. But if you do want to try to convert, that is to turn around, you're the one in charge of you. You can change if you want to, and you can make small steps. You can at least get started. One thing that I'm going to a practice that I'm going to show you here that could be the start is first of all to want it, or sometimes to want it, or want it. Just start somewhere, and don't thwart yourself by saying that's impossible. I could never love an enemy. Well, I follow Jesus the Christ, and not only did he create enemies by loving across boundaries that others thought ought not be transgressed, he was told any number of times, you shouldn't talk to that person. You shouldn't go to that place. Uh, and he very often just moved right through those warnings and accepted and loved somebody who he was being told ought not be loved. Well, um, I'm going to recommend a practice, and you can try it and see if it works for you. It needs to have some quiet because the loudest voice in your head may very well be your ego. It wants to defend itself. It wants to say that it's right and it's the other person's fault, or after all, this is the way I was taught, or this is what my religion, or this is what my country, or this, it'll have recourse to all kind of um, validations of this is why I'm entitled to feel as I do about somebody uh, who I believe is lesser in some way. That voice is going to be loud. And so it's important, I think, to try to do this kind of practice in some kind of quietude where you quiet the mind. I like to light a candle. It's funny because I'll light a candle and then close my eyes. I use those kind that are in glass where I don't have an open flame that could set the house on fire. I like those ones that come in some sort of glass container like a Vigilite. Um, but anyway, I like having a candle going and quiet. I put my phone in the other room, and I dedicate. I call it prayer. It's a spiritual practice. Not everybody uses the word prayer to describe their spiritual practice, but I call it prayer. So as a Catholic, I start in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and I think of myself as being inside God, not just talking to God as to an object. But if God's everywhere, and it's enormous, and I'm small and only this place, I'm always inside God anyway. But I start the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and then I imagine being inside God. And the word imagine, it's in English, it can be kind of slippery. Sometimes when we think of something being imaginary, we think it's unreal or make believe. Well, you can imagine real things and unreal things. Do it right now if you want. Can you imagine something that you know is real? Thanksgiving dinner. There's no turkey in here, but I can imagine Thanksgiving dinner, and there really is Thanksgiving dinner. I can imagine my dog or cat or uh, my car. I can imagine lots of real things, and I can have a picture of them in my head, an imago, an image. Then I can also imagine things that are not real, that they can live in my imagination. I remember doing this exercise once with someone who came out with the idea of the image of a talking bowling ball. Well, bowling balls don't talk. That's not a real thing. Doesn't mean you can't imagine it. When I was a child, I watched cartoons that had all kind of things in them that even a child knew wasn't real, but they were entertaining. Talking bowling balls. Well, when I say imagine, I'm not saying pretend. I'm just saying allow the image to present itself in your head. And when I do this, I think of God as not just an inert other that I'm talking to. I invite participation. I think of the screen of my imagination, and I do think of it as like that, like the place where like the screen that I'm looking at right now as I'm talking to you. Um, I think of the screen of my imagination as being like a touch screen where you interact. And I say to the Holy Spirit, would you put on my imagination? Would you play with me? Would you would you use my imagination to show me something you'd like me to see? So I'm not just always projecting the whole time and only hearing my own psychobabble. And um, I say to the Holy Spirit, would you show me what you would like me to see? And I'll try to be still and see it. You can do the same thing with hearing or the other senses, but for me, visual has been the way I've done this. So I'm preparing to um, to turn around, possibly to convert the way I think and relate to someone who I'm disposed to think less of for some reason. And in my life, sometimes that's been because they hurt me. And because they've hurt me, now I think less of them because of what they said or did. And any goodness that's in them gets diminished because the thing that's front and center is the offensive behavior that they exhibited toward me. Well, for example, if I wanted to work on that, if I wanted to turn around that and see the beauty, like Samuel's angel and Samuel himself saw the beauty. There's beauty in everybody. There is. It's built in. I just think that's absolutely true. There's beauty in the most awful person on earth because they're made of God. They're made in the image and likeness of God. The first two pages of the Bible have that 7 page, I mean that 7 day story of creation. God stands apart from everything and says it's good. And then the second story, the Adam and Eve one, it's It's the earth is this garden with everything in it that's so lush. That's where I began, that I believe that it's true that the person who has hurt me most is still beautiful in God's eyes. Um, I also go to Jesus, who, while dying, he used one of his dying breaths on the cross to say, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Even though they just drove nails through his hands and feet and maybe are standing there laughing and jeering and so on. Nobody apologized. Nobody said, I'm so sorry. He just forgave them because he could. And you and I might not be able to do that in one breath, but there's no reason you can't say, would you give me some of that? I do that frequently. I say, hey, um, would you give me some of what you got? I want to be that forgiving, um, but I can't do it all on my own. I'll try as hard as I can, but would you please augment, supplement, boost my ability to try to see the goodness in everyone, come what may? One way that you might start this is when you go into prayer, maybe light a candle, maybe if it helps, have a little light music on in the background, something perhaps instrumental just to cover over the sound of any other ambient noise around you. Um, Sometimes people like to light incense so that they have a pleasant smell too. Any of these sensory things that create a pleasant uh, environment can be helpful. And then I would say, would you help me imagine someone I love? Just pick somebody. I have this. Can you see these two? That's my mom and dad. I'm 60, almost 68 years old, and any issues that I had with my mom, I hardly ever did have an issue, but with my dad, I did. We struggled to have a loving relationship over the years, but we got there. And now, when I think of either one of them, I don't have any um, uh, problems at all. I just love them. So I might start with somebody I already love and who is not problematic in my imagination, and just say, "Would you please show me my mom and dad?" And then just let my senses and my imagination be full of um, another or other persons that I already love, and everything in me uh, feels safe, good, positive around them. Or I'm grateful for experiences we've had together or whatever. And my parents have both died more than 10 years ago. And that doesn't matter because they're still alive in spirit. But anyway, just taking somebody you already love, and I think it's helpful to have a photo. And you probably, if you love them, you probably have at least one photo. Um, and just allow your imagination to be filled with love, and allow your heart to feel loved. Allow yourself to feel accepting of another person. And that other person is flawed, but you don't care. Um, we don't get to love absolutely perfect people, but um, sometimes love just overlooks. It sees around, it contextualizes, it doesn't care. It just loves anyway. Um, and sometimes uh, when we move into that space, we become aware that I'm not the perfect lover either, that I have all my faults and foibles and stumbles, and these people love me anyway. That can be really helpful. So start with somebody that you already know you love and accept. And then if you want to convert to turn, you can say, well, may I take this energy of loving, and may I now think of someone with whom I'm struggling, or some person or some group that I'm inclined to think the worst of. Could we start there? And then allow something to emerge. It might not be what you started with. You might choose that I really want to work on you know, my ex-partner, or the annoying person at work, or you might have somebody in your mind that you know that you would like to treat more fairly or treat more lovingly, not because they deserve it, but because that's the person you want to be. You don't have to wait you can be a more loving person because you choose to be. Well, if you need it to be a category of drug abusive people, the homeless, gays, Muslims, anybody that's a different color than you, the other gender or whatever. It doesn't really matter. And the culture gives us so many opportunities to be angry about somebody in some kind. It really needs to be turned down. But back to where I was, um, letting your imagination be filled with goodness and love and positivity because you're so well loved by somebody, and you can see the goodness in them so easily. Then you just say, I say to my higher power, who is the Holy Spirit, Father, Son, and Spirit, Jesus, I'll say, could we now move over to this category of this other person or this other group? And would you move some of that positivity, that grace, it's a Christian word for it, to here? Would you help me see this person the way you see them, not the way that I see them in a kind of knee-jerk, judgmental way? I know that my thoughts about this person routinely go to this negative, and I want to acknowledge that, but I want to see bigger. Would you show me more? Would you help me turn the way that the angel and Samuel did in that story? Would you help me turn and just see what's true, see what's beautiful? That's all there is to that. It doesn't have to take long. Um, and I described a way to do that in one's home where you can control the environment and make a beautiful space, but it could also be done in a lesser way, um, waiting in line somewhere, or I don't know. This is an attitude of mind that could be done in brief moments if that's what you choose to do. Sometimes I'll do that when I do my banking, which I have to do a little later today. I try to go at times when I can expect the lines to be short, but they're not always. And so before I get out of the car at the bank, I pray for everybody in the building. It's like before I have a chance to pass some little judgment about somebody's tattoo or nose ring, or um, overhear conversations about their finances and stuff, before I have any opportunity to have opinions that I don't need to have, would you just help me see the goodness of everyone in this place? May I see them shining. Uh, and then I can make them pray for whatever their needs might be. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. But I hope this is helpful. Um, I believe that we can go to a deeper level of seeing the beauty in others, but it doesn't always happen without effort. Sometimes we really do need to get rid of a kind of screen or a set of prejudgments that dispose us to think the worst of somebody or some group. And I just believe that if you follow Jesus, even if that person or group reoffends, or never says they're sorry, that doesn't mean I have to hate. Doesn't mean that I have to presume a huge difference between me and that other because I want to be in union. I want to be, I believe oneness is built into the universe, and that's why it's called uni. And I want to be a part of the oneness and not a part of the separation. I want to be a part of and not apart from all the other folk that God has put here with me. So that's it for today. Um, Remember that I'm praying for you. If you want to be in touch with me, I'm reachable through my website, which is nathan-castle.com. If you want specific information about any of the characters in the stories, I do ask that you read the book first. There's just not enough hours in the day for me to describe things that I've already spent time describing. So that would be helpful. But if there's something I can do for you, just please let me know. For now, this is Father Nathan Castle. Thanks for being a part of this episode of The Joyful Friar. Have a great day.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.